Well done. Well done. We shall now share the screen. Okay, welcome everybody, one and all, to tonight's episode. Where be thee? Okay, here we go. Let me just let it load, get rid of this beach ball. We are having so much fun with this stuff. Okay, we will start with a very special announcement. We are going to have a pre-Pesach class. Pesach, a deep dive. And we're going to look at two studies. One is what Rabbi Kaplan says. He traces a history that shows why we were liberated from Egypt. He starts from the time of creation of the world through the enslavement in Egypt and the liberation from Egypt and the giving of the Torah. It is, in one fell swoop, a great summary of what happened and why. We also are going to look at an article, a very interesting article written by Rav Yoel Ben Nun from Gush, the yeshiva at Har Etzion, talking about Pesach being observed before the Exodus, quoting Torah sources. It's really fascinating. So this will give us a little bit of an appetite for Pesach, and it's going to happen on Wednesday, April 6th from 7 to 9 p.m. And it's going to be the same Zoom link as a meditation class. And we're going to be publicizing that in next weeks to come, but I'm giving you a little bit of a advance notice. So put it on your calendars and bring your friends. All right, we are now going to continue our deep dive into visualization meditation. We'll also continue discussing the comparison between mindfulness and concentration, because it is key. Visualization is key. Understanding the difference between mindfulness and concentration is key. And I want us to get a really firm grip on the fundamentals. If we can get this done, and if we can get a really strong understanding of this, then our meditative practices are going to blossom, because this stuff is very, very important. So important that when we started talking about visualization, Rabbi Kaplan actually told us that it can enhance the intimacy between a man and a woman, which is quite a bold statement, if I do say so myself, only because we normally don't associate mind engagement, especially two people engaging in their minds, when we're talking about intimacy between a man and woman. And yet, he says that's what it's about. So we need to explore that a little bit, and that's why we're taking this deep dive into visualization. We did go back into what he told us about visualization, if you recall, and he talked about the engraving, he talked about the hewing, he talked about doing it on a regular basis. He gave us a taste of the technique of engraving and hewing. Engraving meaning picturing the image on the screen of your mind as if it was engraved there. Engraving, like, you carve it out of stone, giving us a sense of this is there to stay. It's immovable, it's fixed. So we feel that it's permanent, and it helps us keep it there. And hewing, meaning that all extraneous stuff beyond that image, we are chopping away, wiping away, whatever motion you want to use, we're getting rid of that. So there's actual techniques, mental techniques available to help us visualize. And he's getting the ball rolling by introducing us to this engraving and hewing. Again, these mean something to us, and we have to engage ourselves in the process of visualizing. It's not just like watching a movie. Okay. To further emphasize that point, we took a look at Bali Gill, an expert on meditation and an expert on visualization meditation. And Bali Gill mentioned the importance of energizing your vision. So getting yourself emotionally and even physically, at least neurologically, behind the vision, making it real for you. Okay, we expanded that notion further with Maxwell Maltz. In his book, Psycho-Cybernetics, he was the guy who was a cosmetic surgeon for the rich and famous in the 40s and 50s. And he's the one who realized that even after he gave men and women, the rich and famous, a body beautiful, a face beautiful, half of them were happier, half of them were still unhappy. And he realized that there was an internal idea they had about themselves, a self-image, which really dictated what they thought about themselves. And they could have the most beautiful body, most beautiful face in the world, but if they were dissatisfied with themselves, the cosmetic surgery was for nothing. So he dedicated himself to understanding this whole idea of self-image, which we're going to be working with. And he talked about how golfers, including Jack Nicklaus, would visualize every stroke, every swing, everything happening. And we talked about the basketball free throw experiment, where people, a group of athletes who simply visualized doing basketball free throws had virtually the same improvement in performance as people who were actually physically doing free throws. The power of the mind, and even mentioned a concert pianist who didn't practice much physically, but practiced in their mind, and they got a lot better. Okay. We also talked about what he said regarding the snapback effect, meaning that if you don't do something about this image and change this image you have of yourself, then you go about pretending that you're somebody else. You're going to snap right back to the old you. So that happens all the time. People think it's the externals that will change them, but there has to be an internal change. And related to this, we talked about somewhat of a relationship between the external and the internal in this way. I gave the example of, I think it's the Rambam who says, if you wanted to become a more charitable person, you don't just write a check at the end of the year when you're doing your taxes. You give a little something every day into the pushka when you go to Minyan or whatever it is, little something every day, little something every day, little something every day. And that action is making you a more charitable person. You are cognitively realizing, you're looking at that pushka every day for whoever it is, and you're saying, that's me. I'm a giver. 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 And that action is changing your impression of who you are. If you just write a check at the end of the year for your taxes, you're like, okay, I'm writing a check. It's like writing a check to whatever. But if you're putting money in the pushka every day type of thing, then you are changing your impression of who you are. And then you become a more charitable person. Okay. We then mentioned in Psycho-Cybernetics that there are circumstances of self versus the center of yourself, which I'm actually going to open the book for. So let's see. He says, one of the reasons it seems so difficult for a person to change habits, personality, or a way of life has been that nearly all efforts at change have been directed to the circumstances of the self, so to speak, rather than the center. Okay, that means people go ahead, maybe I'll be happier if I change jobs. Maybe I'll be happier if I do this. Maybe I'll be happier if I do that. On the external, not realizing that if they don't address the internal dissatisfaction, no matter how many changes, they're going to end up equally unhappy. So that was a key point that was made. Stephen Siebold then said the same thing. And he talked about how the winners, the most successful people in all walks of life, and not just materially, they do what he called metacognition, meaning they know what they're thinking about. They're thinking and they realize they're thinking and they're the contents of their thinking. And then they realize, well, I might have to make some changes in what I'm thinking about. I might have to, if I realize that I'm the kind of guy that says I'm always a loser, or I'm too old for this, or I'm not in the, this is not for me, I never win anything, all this internal drama, you need to be aware of that to change it. And then we realize what he says, metacognition, we've been calling mindfulness. So Stephen Siebold is actually reinforcing that mindfulness is key to changing the idea you have about yourself. You first have to be aware of what it is you're saying to yourself. And if you go through the day, you'll realize this is what people do. Like, I can't do that. I'm too whatever. You get that. You're like, oh, I got to catch myself. Maybe I'm not that bad. Maybe I'm not that weak. Maybe I'm not that dumb. Maybe I'm not that bad. We keep saying this, and you got to realize you're saying it in order to change it. But you got to change it in order to raise your performance up a few notches. That's what this is all about. So now, today, we go into what he calls the real secret. What does that mean? Let's take a look. And again, the reason why we're saying this is because we keep talking about the power of visualization, but we need to understand that we don't want to wreck our own plans. We don't want to visualize something and put a lot of time and energy into it only to sabotage our own plans because our impression of ourselves is, I'm not worth getting that. See, that's why we keep harping on this. You have to believe this is something that not just doable, but it's for you. You have to see yourself doing it and say, yes, that is me. I could be doing it. But if your idea of yourself is like, nah, not for me, why bother? Okay, so that's why we're focusing on this. So what does he say is the real secret? Discovery of the self-image explains all the apparent discrepancies we have been discussing. It is the common denominator, the determining factor in all our case histories, the failures as well as the successes. The secret is this: to really live, that is, to find life reasonably satisfying, you must have an adequate and realistic self-image that you can live with. You must find yourself acceptable to you. You must have a wholesome self-esteem. You must have a self that you can trust and believe in. You must have a self that you are not ashamed to be, one that you can feel free to express creatively rather than hide or cover up. The man in the mirror. You have to look at the guy in the mirror and say, yeah, that guy's good. I like him. You must know yourself, both your strengths and your weaknesses, and be honest with yourself concerning both. Your self-image must be a reasonable approximation of you, being neither more or less than you are. So, and again, how does this tie to the meditation? How do we get there? You have to be able to face the good, the bad, and the ugly about yourself and make necessary changes. But your starting point has to be reality. This is who I am. When this self-image is intact and secure, you feel good. When it is threatened, you feel anxious and insecure. When it is adequate and one that you can be wholesomely proud of, you feel self-confident. You feel free to be yourself and to express yourself. You function at your optimum. When the self-image is an object of shame, you attempt to hide it rather than express it. Creative expression is blocked. You become hostile and hard to get along with. Shame, like grips you and holds you back. Okay. So here we have a really good tie-in between self-image and visualization and meditation. We want to have a visualization of a better life, but we need to understand, have a realistic idea of who we are so we can really realistically see ourselves leading that life And we need to know who we are by being mindful. We need to be able to see ourselves, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and say, do I need to change anything about myself in order to deserve and merit and really think realistically about living that life that I'm visualizing? Okay. Now, one further point he makes is as follows. Says he, in my opinion, the professions of psychology and psychiatry are often far too pessimistic regarding people and their potential for self-directed change, even greatness. Since psychologists and psychiatrists deal with so-called abnormal people, the literature is almost exclusively taken up with various abnormalities, with some people's tendencies towards self-destruction. Many people, I am afraid, have read so much of this type of viewpoint that they have come to regard such things as hatred, the destructive instinct, guilt, self-condemnation, and all the other negatives as normal human behavior. Average persons feel awfully weak and impotent when they think of the prospect of pitting their puny will against these negative forces in human nature in order to gain health and happiness. If this were a true picture of human nature and the human condition, self-improvement would indeed be a rather futile thing. Okay, no. Actually, Rabbi Sachs talks about this. He talked about the sacrifices in the parsha we read yesterday, and he talked about the korban toda, the Thanksgiving sacrifice, and he mentioned that it takes effort over time to be thankful. He does mention that the shurish of Jew, Yehudi, toda is hoda, is to give thanks, and so we're people that give thanks. But he talks about how our lives are full of giving thanks. From when we wake up, modeh ani, giving thanks. You consider the 100 brachot we say a day as thanks, and on and on and on and on. So he goes, but everybody remarks that it takes work to do this, and it's almost contrary to our nature. Why? Like, in a way, this is what Maxwell Maltz is saying. Maxwell Maltz is saying that we retain a certain negativity about ourselves and the world, and he says the professional mental health professionals kind of feed on that, but Rabbi Sachs says beyond that, it's almost kind of normal because we have a primal instinctive wariness, and we need to know, is there any potential threat out there, and is there anything that could do me harm? And you need to think about this stuff. It's an instinctual thing to survive. So we have to like transcend that and be more thankful. And on the one hand, be on our guard, but not let that dominate our thinking. Let that be in the background. And on top of that, be thankful for this and thankful for that and thankful for this and thankful for that. Okay, so Maxwell Maltz is going to teach us more about how to accomplish that. But even Rabbi Sachs will tell us that this is something we need to do. And getting back to Bali Gil, what is he talking about? He's talking about energizing your vision. How can you possibly energize your vision if you don't have an attitude of gratitude? I mean, you've got to be able to say, believe that things are possible. If you have an attitude of gratitude, then you're like, oh, I'm thankful about this, and I'm thankful about this, and I'm thankful about this, and I'm thankful about this. And all of a sudden you become more hopeful, like, oh, good things can happen. Look at all the good things that have happened so far. Good things can continue to happen. So if you have that approach, then you can really believe in the vision and energize it, because you're like, wow, maybe I should be able to expect more blessings. Have a great track record of receiving a bunch of them. Why would that stop? If only if I stop looking for them. Okay. Very cool stuff. Okay. Okay. One other point that I want to emphasize, I want to go back to this point here. Mental pictures offer us an opportunity to practice new traits and attitudes which otherwise we could not do. Okay, so let's suppose that we've done all this internal work and we realize there's some stuff we got to do and be better. And we realize, okay, we've reconciled a few things on ourselves, and we've faced ourselves. Yeah, well, I haven't been as courteous and thankful to that ShopRite cashier as I really should be. I know better. Okay, I face that about myself, and I feel like I'm ready to do better. So he is actually suggesting, let's go through a trial run. Let's visualize ourselves going back to that ShopRite and going to the same register as that cashier and buying the same whatever orange juice and yodels and saying, okay, um, we now are, I'm now paying the cashier, and the cashier is saying, did her job, and now I'm saying thankful. Now I'm saying thank you. We're doing a trial run in our mind so that when we show up at the shop right that afternoon, we're ready, willing, and able to put it into action here. Okay. And remember that as we discussed, the Rambam talks about how teshuva is accomplished when you mess up and you put yourself in the exact same situation, but you don't mess up this time. Okay. That doesn't happen automatically. These are keys to achieving teshuva because these are the steps you need to take in order to not make the same mistake again. It doesn't just happen you've got to put the work in to do better. And visualization and this kind of work on yourself is key to making that teshuva. Okay. Now, there's one other point I wanted to make regarding this. Okay. Yom Kippur. Why did I stick that there? Okay. Maxwell Maltz talked about you have to be acceptable to you in order to be able to move forward, because if you're not acceptable to you, why bother? You're not gonna be motivated to do anything. So I'm bringing up Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur, in my eyes, is a huge way that a kakila, that the whole congregation does this. How? We go through all the vidui. We did this, we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. We're pretty tough on ourselves. There's like pages of this stuff, and yet, then after this, what do? Kiana, we do this like affirmation. It's like, God, you're the shepherd, we're the sheep. We're this, we're that. We reaffirm God, but you know, we got you, you got us. And that motivates us to keep going here. We give ourselves, we say, I'm acceptable. We tell ourselves we can still do this. And even though we messed up, it's still okay because he believes in us and we believe in him. So the stuff that Maxwell Maltz is talking about on an individual basis, that you have to be acceptable to yourself and you have to have the idea that you're worth going forward, we do that on a social basis. And think about how often that takes place in Yom Kippur. That's such a great and balanced way that Chazal has given us to move forward as a group. It's like, on the one hand, we look at the good and the bad and the ugly. By the same token, we're like, okay, we got this. You got me, I got you, God. Let's keep going. Let's keep working at this. It's a wonderful thing. So that's so interesting how this whole business about self-image and psycho-cybernetics gives us an enhanced appreciation of Judaism. of Judaism in it. Wouldn't it be nice if they taught this perspective when we learned how the tefillot for the Yom Tovim? Okay. Okay. Let's continue this thinking with Bhante. Bhante. What does Bhante have to say? Again, we're comparing mindfulness and concentration. Mindfulness is the more important of the components of mindfulness and concentration. It should be built as soon as you comfortably can do so. Mindfulness provides the needed foundation for the subsequent development of deeper concentration. Most blunders in this area of balance will correct themselves in time. Right concentration develops naturally in the wake of strong mindfulness. If you work on being mindful, it will be easier to develop concentration. The more you develop the noticing factor, the quicker you will notice the distraction and the quicker you will pull out of it and return to the formal object of attention. It's like you need to be aware that you're distracted to remind yourself, oh, I got to be focused now. But you need mindfulness to be aware that you're not focused anymore so that you can get back and be in focused. If you didn't have mindfulness, you'd be unfocused and not realize it. That's his point. The natural result is increased concentration. That's why we say the whole activity we do at the end of the class, the activity is getting back to the focal point. Because if you're getting back to the focal point, you're showing yourself, I'm mindful that I'm not on the focal point. So now I'm going to go back to it. So you're developing your skill at concentration by staying on the breath because you're mindful that you lost your concentration and got off the breath. That's what he's talking about. It's a nuanced thing, but that's how they work together. Okay. Thus, the two factors need to balance and support each other's growth quite naturally. Just about the only rule you need to follow at this point is to put your effort and concentration at the beginning until the monkey mind phenomenon is cooled down a bit. That means, you're just going crazy with all your thoughts and all this stuff. After that, emphasize mindfulness. If you find yourself getting frantic, emphasize concentration. If you find yourself going into a stupor, emphasize mindfulness. Okay. And I want to emphasize, as he said a few times, if you want to meditate and you're all agitated and stuff, do something physical first. The mind follows the body and the body follows the mind. Do something, walking, whatever it is. If your body calms down, your mind will calm down, and then it'll be easier to focus. Okay. One of the most difficult things to learn is that mindfulness is not dependent on any emotional or mental state. I'm mindful of the fact that I'm angry. I'm mindful of the fact that I'm agitated. That's why I start gaining control of it. I can't gain control of it if I'm not aware that I am agitated, and that my mindfulness makes me aware of it. We have certain images of meditation. Meditation is something done in quiet caves by tranquil people who move slowly. Those are training conditions. They are set to foster concentration and to learn the skill of mindfulness. Once you have learned that skill, however, you can dispense with the training restrictions, and you should. You don't need to move at a snail's pace to be mindful. You don't even need to be calm. You can be mindful while solving problems in intensive calculus. You can be mindful in the middle of a football scrimmage. You can even be mindful in the midst of a raging fury. Mental and physical activities are no bar to mindfulness. If you find your mind extremely active, then simply observe the nature and degree of that activity. It is just a part of the passing show within. I'm going to give you an example of this. Because again, a lot of people, to be mindful, I got to be sitting here cross-legged going, Om, and no. So as you know, I practice Kung Fu and I have training partners. And one of my training partners, that I see on Thursdays, we go at it very fiercely, and we have for a number of years. This guy's 40 years old, and he's been in competitive combat since he was 5. His father enrolled him in a league, town wrestling league at age 5. And he wrestled competitively at the national level in high school. 18, went through college, did combat in college, and then right after that started Kung Fu at the Blue Dragon. This is a tough guy. And his nose has been broken a lot. You bang him on the nose, it's going to bleed. Okay. So why am I saying this? We get to know each other. We get to trust each other. We get to go fast and furious. I am really mindful of the fact that if I bop this guy in the nose, it's going to be a bloody mess. So we can go, and I can go, and I am mindful of the fact of where my hand has to hit his face. And we go pretty quickly. I am mindful that I should keep my hand open and not closed. It's going to be more percussive. And I'm mindful of where on his face I should land. It can't be here. That's mindfulness. And we're going pretty fast, I want to tell you. That's mindfulness in the midst of a fast and furious drill. That's just one of 1,000 examples. But it just goes to show it's not, mindfulness is just not restricted to cool, calm, and collected activity. You're mindful. And think about all the times. Maybe you had a spat with your spouse or something, and you said something bad last week, and it was hurtful. And then you go at it again. And then you're about to say it, but you're mindful of the fact that you said it last week, and it was hurtful. That's mindfulness. Oh, I can't say that now. That's another example. Excuse me. That's what we're talking about. So when he says you can be mindful in the midst of a raging fury, that's what he means. And then the concentration kicks in and say, all right, well, now let me focus on what I should say as opposed to what I shouldn't say. Mindfulness and concentration working together. Okay. Excuse me. This is so interesting and so relevant. Okay. Having said all that, let us meditate. Margaret?